Hi, and welcome to the second session of the 2023 FFCS conference. I'm Jeana Roth, and I'm back to introduce the second session of the Get Wise track that we went through during the conference. You'll see a lot of workshopping and be able to see some of the results of that group processing. We did a lot of huge posters with lots of lists. As much as possible, I invite you to join along with us on the slides and complete the exercises that we did in the workshop itself. I think you'll be surprised by how helpful this process is. So without further ado, here is session 2. Let's go ahead and get started. We are going to pick back up with this diagram that we've been starting with. Grieving the offense. This is the bulk of what I do as a living. I help people grieve the offense, right? So we talk about it, we go through the emotions of it, and then we kind of start to work through and actually experience the anger, the sadness, the even sometimes relief that you might feel. So are you familiar with the 5 stages of grief? That's the denial, anger, sadness, bitterness, and eventually acceptance, right? Grief never looks that organized. Never. I've never seen it look that organized. And I heard from a friend recently that that's actually only if you're dying, if you're the one dying, then there's stages of grief like that. But that's actually a misapplication of that. So what's helpful when we think about grief is to think about it being more like a tangled ball of yarn, right? So you pull on one side and the other side gets tighter. And then you try to work on this other side and this side gets tighter. So as we're unraveling it all, it's going to take time, and it's going to, there's going to be plenty of mistakes in the process. So this is where we want to make sure we give ourselves plenty of time to go through the process. Don't feel rushed in any grief process. So a mix of anger, sadness, denial, bargaining, acceptance, and all the other emotions, right? So Dixie was talking about the feeling wheel last night. And so having a feeling wheel where you can start to express frustration and feeling insecure, and just like some of the ones that you might not think about, and just kind of helping to apply those towards the forgiveness process. So couple analogies on how to grieve. So there's this idea of like riding the wave. So if you can stay on top of the waves as they come, that's actually one of the most helpful ways to grieve. So instead of like trying to swim straight through, just let yourself float on the emotions. So let those emotions come in and then just try to stay on top of them. It's the difference between being a solid pier and a floating dock, right? So the one is going to get hit by those waves over and over again, and the other is going to flux with the waves as they come. So the pier that stands sturdy takes a beating, right? It's more damage. It can be more damage to us as we grieve if we're not able to be flexible. So that's one helpful way to think about it. Another is going back to that cleaning out the wound analogy that we talked about last night. So thinking about as we clean out a wound, can I share a really gross story with you all? Anybody like really sensitive to like blood and gore and stuff? Good. Okay, so we were missionaries in East Africa, in Tanzania, and that's the only religious part about the whole thing. I got massive boils on my knee. And so at one point we had, I love the picture of a boil for talking about forgiveness, which it's great because there's so much infection inside, right? And that infection needs to get out of your skin. And if you squeeze it, it actually can go deeper into your body, and that's really, really dangerous. So instead, they excise it. So they make a cut and they release that pressure, and then they help to drain it out. But as you're healing a boil, you really want to make sure it heals from the inside out. If it scabs over, that infection goes right back in. So what they do is they actually pack it. They put it's like a cotton cloth thing inside, and then you take it out. As it heals, like you take a little bit more and more out each time and cut it off, and then that heals from the inside out. So that's a lot of how they deal with wounds that are really deep. So using that analogy, when we clean that out, we want to make sure we keep the environment clean, keep grieving, but also it has to go slowly over time. We pull out a little bit more and then a little bit more, and it is very much a process. So those boils that I had took about 6 weeks to heal fully. And I still have scars on my knees. It's still sensitive to the touch. So that's grieving. And we could do we could do a deep dive into grieving itself, right? But there are some other talks out there on grief, and so we're not going to spend all of our time there today. But are there any questions about grief as a process before we move on to that next step? Is it necessary to have finished the grieving before you move on? No. And so that's what we're going to keep coming back to. It's yes, it's like a spiral. Okay, so think about it like a spiral. We're going to go around once, and then we're going to come a little bit inside of that, and then go around again, and then go around again. And so I think it's a better picture of what that process looks like. It's not linear, right? It's not like I finish this, then do this, then do this. So as much as I love these step-by-step sort of resources, it's really just a picture. It really needs like loops in it to be able to show like we do this, then we come back, and we do this again, and we come back. So great question. No, it's not linear. We do not have to finish that completely. But you might want to finish a chunk and then move on with that chunk. That might be a more helpful way to think of it. Okay. So after the grief process, then we just forgive, right? Just easy as that. Just forgive. No, I'm not trying to make light of that. I know that this is really, really hard. And so it is a release. So it is an actual step, and it is a process. So the process, though, is going to be the grieving and then releasing. Grieving and then releasing. So the more you grieve those individual named out parts, the more you're going to be able to release more and more of those. On the whole, we can call that whole process forgiveness, but it's also the individual release. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's both, and we use those words in a really confusing way. So I really like calling it a release, though, because there's a choice involved in letting it go, right? As we're going to see later with paper airplanes, there's a choice where I choose to let go of that paper, right? And so that choice right there, that's the forgiveness, that's the release part, but it's also the making of the paper airplane, the folding of the paper airplane, the walking out to the balcony, the throwing, like all of that is also part of grieving and of forgiveness process. So it's both and. It's both the little, like the zoomed in part and the bigger picture part. Yeah, and then going back to, you may loop through these steps, and that's absolutely okay. Grief comes in waves, and so can forgiveness. So that's what we actually like to say. So if you think about, I looked it up, it is the present progressive form. So I am forgiving, right? It's an ongoing form, right? That captures the fact that there's an ongoing element to this. I didn't forgive, right? It's not that I forgave you for that, right? I just don't like that form, because even if we use something like I have forgiven you, that implies that there's an ongoing element to this forgiveness process, even if it was just in the recent past. So we want some sort of continuous or progressive sort of tone or tense within our verb there, okay? So I have forgiven, I am forgiving, I'm going to be forgiving, whether you're in the past or present or future. All right, so the next part is considering reconciliation. And this is a huge point of contention. Not all the time is it safe to reconcile. And so this is where, if you heard the talk last night, this is where a lot of times people will come across secondary spiritual abuse. They will be told to forgive right away, forgive quickly, right? Like right now. And it just doesn't work that way. So when you forgive quickly, then you're supposed to reconcile and be all okay, right? And that's not safe. So some things to consider. Is it physically safe? Am I going to get harmed if I try to reconcile or repair with this person? If there is a child molester, I'm not going to let them around my kids. No matter how much they've repented and turned away from that, they're still not getting access to my kids, right? And that's not to say that I can't forgive, but that's not necessarily physically safe or sexually safe there, right? Is it emotionally safe? Let's go back to those boundaries, right? Is it emotionally safe for me to lower that fence, to open a gate, to allow somebody in? Is that emotionally safe? It's going to be different for each person, right? There's no one size fits all when it comes to forgiveness. And so this is part of why I think forgiveness is such a tricky topic to talk about, because there is so much individual work that goes into it.
How do you know it's
How do you know? How do you know if it's going to be safe?
It's going to be emotionally safe based on where they are.
Yeah.
The uterus.
So this is where I'm going to go back to trusting your gut, right? And so this is why it's so important, and a big part of the Christian Science recovery is trying to get back in touch with your body, right? But our nervous system, our bodies give us feedback on what's happening around us. So if your gut is firing and you're like, something's not right here, it probably isn't, right? And so sometimes we have to recalibrate that a little bit and learn to like take that in. But it is good to listen to our gut. But that means our bodies have to matter, right? Our body and the input we're getting from our body has to matter. But our body and our nervous system are going to respond so much faster than our cognitive brain can think. Okay? Nervous system, that's why triggers are a thing, right? They happen like this. You don't know why they're happening until later, usually, unless you've done some work to identify what those triggers are. But there are a lot of reasons why we want to trust our body and then just help our body to express those things through. That's actually one of our biggest assets here, is our body's response to what is happening. When we can harness our body's power to help give us input from our environment, that's how we can know we're safe. Right? And that could be a whole webinar on its own of like how to know if you're safe. How do you know the difference between what's safe and what's comfortable? Yeah, so most people get to feel that out from the time they're a child up into adulthood, right? So that's maybe another thing that we need to forgive, is that you didn't get the time to build that comfort level with your own nervous system to know whether something is actually a threat or just feels like a threat. Right? Because the feeling of safe and whether something's actually safe have to be calibrated, right? And so we do that by being around safe people and knowing, okay, this safe person feels this way to me, right? And so like we start to build trust in that. And then if there's a rupture, then that takes away the trust, right? And then we can try to rebuild that back. So it comes to like, almost think of like a scale, like a balance, like hanging in the balance, like an old-fashioned weight system. The more evidence you have that something or someone is safe, the more this is going to come down. That doesn't mean they have to be perfect, but they're mostly safe, right? Yeah. And it goes back to like parenting, like you only have to get it right 30% of the time, but if they don't, then it's sort of, that is off, that balance is off. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness. So they're not the same. It really is important to differentiate. Forgiveness is a process that an individual takes on in order to change the way they think about the situation that happened. Typically, this process happens between an individual and higher power. Now, I do want to be clear. This is not changing your thinking in the CS way. This is different. This is seeing it as it actually is and was. It's just us getting in line with reality, with what actually happened. Is that okay? Is that a triggering way to say that? No, okay, perfect. So using a grief process, the individual explores feelings of sadness and anger while working to see the situation as it really is or was. Forgiveness is a process and takes time. I will reiterate that over and over to you again. Forgiveness takes time. And even if you are actively in that forgiveness process and looping through, it's still going to take you a lot of time. So be kind to yourself in that process. Reconciliation, I said that weird, happens when both parties have chosen to apologize or forgive as appropriate and agree to re-engage in building trust. There's a lot more steps required for reconciliation. Reconciliation is a rupture repair process in attachment language. So it requires that both parties are present, humble, and invested, and it requires safety. If somebody is not present, humble, and invested, they're not safe, right? They're not safe enough to repair too. Now you might repair in a limited way, like we can go back to that boundaries language and think about a fence that would work there, right? Maybe I'll let you see over, but not just walk into my space. So we want to kind of think attachment and boundaries at the same time, right? We have those two lenses that we're looking through. Forgiveness, a process that I do. And then once that person is in forgiveness and has worked through a forgiveness process, and the other person has taken responsibility, then there's a chance to repair that. Really, really, really important that we get those differences. So it is enough to be on the path toward forgiveness rather than arriving at forgiveness as an end result. And this is the looping. Keep yourself looping. It's okay. Like, that's normal. You're not spinning like a wheel. I mean, it's not like you're not going anywhere. It is taking you somewhere. It's just slower maybe than what you want it to be. And I get it. Like, I want to be done with it as well. Contrary to many teachings, forgiveness is not on a timeline, and it is important to allow the feelings to be fully expressed and allow space for grief to unfold naturally. Attempts to rush it along or shortcut forgiveness typically result in a longer process overall. They can also cause further spiritual abuse and damage. So, like, as we're in this process, I just want you to know, like, this is an invitation into forgiveness. It is not at all something we're demanding of you, right? Like, everybody is at their own place in this journey, and we want to be really careful not to coerce it from you as well. Okay. We invite you, as we're brainstorming these things, hopefully this gives you more language to name out those offenses that were done to you, but it might not be right this second, and that's okay. So wherever you are at on that process is okay. Just be forgiving. Be in that process of considering, thinking, naming the offenses, grieving, for actually doing the release, and then considering reconciliation. Okay? What I want to do is actually go into a little bit more about forgiveness and reconciliation. We kind of flew through all of those steps. Okay? So can we as a group just consider, like, what is the hardest step for you and why? And I want to go into like a personal space first, because we kind of flew through all of those different stages. But take a look at your figure and figure out which step feels the hardest for you. And I just want you to journal on that a little bit. Yeah, let's focus on those steps on the right, because that's what we're talking about. We've been talking about barriers to forgiveness. Let's talk about those 5. So placing blame appropriately, grieving, forgiving, or releasing, considering reconciliation, and then learning to trust again. Okay, so take a minute just with that. So we are going to just kind of go through the steps one by one. So if you had, and again, this is only as much as you want to share. Don't feel like you have to share much. But I kind of want to explore them step by step and just kind of go through that, because I felt like we just kind of raced through. So let's start with the placing blame appropriately. Anyone find that one to be the hardest for them? That's okay. All right, tell me what is hard about placing blame appropriately. So he was saying, does the person need medical or mental help, or are they just a jerk? You know, and so kind of that it's hard to figure out where that blame actually lies. That's a great point. Anyone else who had placing blame appropriately want to share? So how much to blame yourself? Too much or not enough? And where's that line in there? Yeah, so it takes a lot of energy and just kind of, you have to stay with it, right? So perseverance in that. Saying like overdwelling on what is my part. Like it takes 2, but we don't split that responsibility evenly. We just don't, right? Even if there's something in that I may eventually want to apologize for, that's not the bulk of what's happening there, right? And it's a distortion to say that it is. What about the next one, grieving? So much that it's overwhelming. There are so many components, like how do I do this, right? And then is there more in that? Like what? I'm going to put, I don't know all the things to grieve, and just gaps. Is that feel? Okay. So just added like not knowing whether I'm actually grieving or just thinking about it, right? How do we know if we're 3 steps up where it says we tell and retell the story, right? Or are we actually grieving through the story? Good. This is great, guys. This is great. And this is kind of a combination of those barriers we talked to along with the what and who we need to forgive, right? So there's a lot of really great content here. Anybody label that forgive, release part as the hardest step for them? Tell me about that. What makes that hard? I want to catch up the online group. So he was saying like not making space or time. It's too uncomfortable. And then speeding it up too fast, right? Wanting to kind of go past it really quickly. And then also... yeah, to avoid those feelings. Yeah. And then that shut down mode. And I really loved what you said, the tears behind my eyes. I think that like And then like you feel that prick, and then you're like, good, I got to get away from that, right? Right? And your body's expressing like, I have, and then we shut it down. Yeah, kind of get stuck in that neural pathway, right? So, and the more we travel a neural pathway, like the more we do an action or behavior, the more automatic that becomes. Yeah. I'm going to call that deprogramming. Okay, let's go on to the next one, considering reconciling. Anybody want to talk about that one? So kind of lumping which three? Placing blame, grieving, and forgiving. So, and I think that's a really important point. Like she was talking about how, when the placing blame appropriately, grieving and forgiving, and like trying to figure out like how do you know if you're merging those three, it's hard to like, we almost do need to separate them out into individual steps, right? And make it maybe more overt for the time being until we can kind of get our footing and know that this pattern, this process is working for us, right? So what if we were to pull that back out and go back up to placing blame appropriately, and then actually taking the time to like maybe even write that out and like delineate, right? Because I think what you're describing about this process is a lot of the reason why people don't want to do it, right? It's confusing. I get into it, and then all of a sudden I'm just stuck in this big loop. That doesn't feel comfortable. I don't want to do this. There's so much shame involved. So what if we actually took a step back and actually wrote out those things that we need to place the blame for, like we did earlier, and kind of just make these lists. You guys can take pictures of these too before you go. We will try to get them to everybody, including the online group. But yeah, actually processing through these individual things and seeing if that process is helpful for like actually grieving the individual items. Because again, I think going back to the whole, we don't grieve the system, we don't forgive the system, we forgive the people. I think that's also another illustration we see from that, because if we can get all the way down to the person, I can say, you did this hurt me. Yeah, and then I can actually maybe release that. But CS as a whole is so overwhelming to forgive. I mean, this is kind of coming together in real time as we're kind of talking through it, but I wonder if it's helpful because every person's going to be a little bit different. So let's say there's medical neglect. Each person is going to have, and maybe you do have to spiral through it all. Maybe it's, I have to forgive mom for not taking me, and I have to forgive Mary Baker Eddy for this part, and maybe we still don't want to forgive Mary Baker Eddy. That's fair, right? He was talking about how sometimes we can confuse excusing and blaming, right? Because blame has so much weight, and so if that blame has so much weight, maybe we can relabel that as just naming actions. Yeah. Right? And so actually going to the behavior instead of like this whole concept, and that's what's so difficult about forgiving. I mean, forgiving a system, you can't do that, right? Because there's nothing specific there to forgive. It's more about the actions, the things that they've done wrong, than them just being bad, right? And so that's a whole different kind of construct.
It's easier to pinpoint a blame. Say if you had a medical problem that was neglected and you suffered because of it. It's harder to know how to place the blame when it was mental malpractice. Right. And it's just the words they said to you over and over. You aren't hurt. You're okay. Brush that off.
So gaslighting.
Know the truth.
Gaslighting is the action there.
So, how do you forgive? How do you grieve gaslighting?
How do you forgive gaslighting? Well, who gaslit you? Right? So tracing that back, who is the subject of that sentence? Who did the thing? Right? And then tracing that back, that's the list, right? That's why this is so big. It's because the list is really, really long, right? Right.
They don't even talk about more.
Right. So being so big picture is actually then a disability, right? Because we need to be specific in order to be able to heal and move on, but we can't be specific because you don't have that language. Mm-hmm.
But it was horrible.
Yeah. So the idea of culpability, and like if we hold them accountable, then we have to hold ourselves accountable too, and that's then that's something we're going to have to ask for forgiveness for. We're going to have to apologize. We're going to have to correct that in order to repair the relationship, right? Yeah. So never having to deal with the specifics.
Steering away from those kind of details.
Yeah. Now, I think you guys are onto something really good here, though, because as you look at this, I think you're right. I think we're ending up over here in the we accuse and excuse, right? And so we want to pull ourselves back over here because this is actually where we'll be able to release, right? This is just going to make us angry and hold that anger in a way that's not helpful, right? Whereas the anger over here is productive and leads us through. The anger here keeps us stuck, right? So I think that's the difference between these two pathways.
And also ask about grieving about it.
Can you grieve without knowing what you're yeah.
Sudden burst of
Yeah.
emotion.
Yeah, so when you do feel that grief feeling, that burst of emotion, then is that a generalized grief or is that a specific grief? And I think that's where we go back to that attachment, right? And I'm going to keep going back to that attachment because I think that is attachment to ourselves. Can I be curious about where that's coming from and maybe what the source of that is, right? And that's going to take time, right? It's going to take the time, the safe space to be able to process through that, but to actually go in and say, what am I feeling? How is that feeling in my body? How does that connect into thoughts? How does that connect into actual offenses? And I think you guys touched on some really great points, never having to deal with the specifics, right? The distortions, not being able to name those actions. I think those are going to be keys to us being able to process, to place that blame appropriately so that we can grieve and then we can release and then the reconciliation and the other parts are just, we never get to those parts, right? Because we've already ended up on the accuse and excuse. Accuse and excuse.
Everybody needs to hear this. I'm like, everybody needs to hear this. I know, it's true.
This is a wonderful brainstorm mind meld session. Thanks, guys.
Accuse or lash out.
Not being afraid of being accused.
Yeah,
I like that.
You're no longer like playing the game anymore.
Right.
With that.
Because you are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And you know how, and you'll know how to repair that when we go through the next section, right?
Yes.
And we're going to learn all those things, and then it's just a matter of I messed up, I need to repair.
Yeah.
That's normal.
Yes. That's great.
Sound good?
Yeah, healthy
I think
relationships,
sometimes
it's a possibility.
I like that.
Well, that's it. Sometimes when we try to do that, we feel rejected.
You feel
You know,
rejected.
So then we go back up to these other things because we don't know, we aren't getting any satisfaction from trying to express ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so I'm going to add those
Yeah.
those 2 points I'm going to add under considering reconciling because I think those are connected. So not getting the responses I want or expect, and then also feeling rejected, feeling isolated. Anything else under considering reconciling? Yeah, and the truth is you can't. That is a process, and that is an ordered thing. You can loop back, but you have to go through the process, or it's inauthentic. It's like that boil, and you've got a nice scab over, and it looks like it's level, but there is infection inside, right? I'm really glad that we got to talk about my boil today. That makes me really happy. Sorry for all those. No, I think what you're describing is exactly right. Like there is no way to heal and to, like, you're trying to then engage with family, but there's been no truth, right? So now remember, forgiveness and reconciliation are separate. So you can still hold on to your forgiveness process, and reconciliation is not a requirement. It's a consider reconciliation. Now you might consider it and say that is not safe, right? Or that's only safe with a really tall wall, right? That is safe only with a locking gate, right? So whatever that looks like for you, use the metaphor, use the picture to describe what you need in that moment. Does that help? Because there's no one size fits all. And I think that's where we get into trouble, especially within Christian circles. That happens of like, do this simple, everything's done, tied up with a bow. I've never seen a bow, but I've never seen them, right? And it just does not look that pretty. What about learning to trust again? Is there anything we want to add for that, or do we want to kind of put that together with considering reconciliation? Yeah. Well, and I think it might be helpful to consider it's not necessarily trusting that person, but learning to trust in general and like letting yourself trust, right? So not necessarily going towards that bitterness, but being able to engage in maybe not the relationships that stay unhealthy, but the ones that you might have that are healthy, right? And building trust there because that's safer and has some health.
I mean, I'm
Right, so
curious.
it's changing the end result.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like, I think we can at this point in the process put those together because reconciliation and trust, those are going to be processes that really don't have a place with a lot of the Christian Science people in your life, right? So they're not, like, if we haven't done those first steps, and if those people haven't proven to be trustworthy, we're not getting there in general anyway. But maybe that's a conversation for another day of how do we not let other people determine our growth and ability to trust, right?
But, and I like what you said about learning, seeing what people you can trust, because that will build our capability
Yeah.
that we were missing before of knowing who is trustworthy.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah, learning to trust
So not even
yourself.
about the other person, but just like, oh yeah.
Bingo. I love that because then, again, that takes the abuser out of the picture, right? So it takes that control back and puts that within ourself to say, nobody else gets to determine if I can trust myself, right? And I can trust my gut, my feedback that my body's giving me. I can trust psychologically that I know what healthy relationships are and what healthy attachment rupture and repair looks like, and I can move forward in that. That's gold. So being more mindful in the moment and more aware of yourself and all those responses you're getting so that you can maybe even steer. Yeah. And again, not to put blame on anybody who's been there, like who's gone that direction, right? Because there are lots of reasons why we end up there. But you're right, I think if we can push back on that and gain some of that back for ourselves to be able to say, no, I know my body, I know my triggers, and I can trust this, and I trust me engaging back with other people. Not every person is safe. And that's the thing I hear over and over talking with former Christian Scientists is that not everybody is safe to re-engage with. And maybe you shouldn't. I don't love the word should, but maybe that's a should, right? They haven't earned enough trust.
Give you power, you choose not to.
You choose not to.
Choose not to engage with
Yeah.
certain people.
You choose not to. And you choose to engage in healthier people that are going to increase your ability to trust in healthier people. And then that becomes a positive neural network instead of one that's based on the trauma. So if I have that reconciliation conversation, if I approach that, I might break their brain, right? Yeah. So and maybe this is where, okay, what if it looked like this? I'm just going to put out a hypothetical. So what if it looked like considering reconciling, knowing that they're not safe, and then not having that conversation? And in that, we learn to trust ourselves, right? Because I know that I have assessed the situation appropriately. I've gone through the steps, and now I feel that resonance that this is actually okay, right? And then I trust that, and that builds trust in myself so that I can go back and keep doing this process. Because once you're done, you're not done, right?
Because reconciliation is
Reconciliation is two parties. Yep.
It can't be one, it has to be both.
That's right. And if the other party, and this is what we're going to talk about with apology, and that's why it's so important that we learn how to do apology so that we can be safe people, right? That I can learn how to apologize to somebody so that I can offer that as safety. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through that. How do I apologize if I was the offender? And I don't want to rush through this, but we're going to need to take time. You're going to need to take time to reflect on this. So just keep that in mind as we go through the steps. It will feel fast, but it actually, I've tried to take what can be considered like one or two steps and really spread it out into a total of 6, okay? So the first step, expressing what you did. What did you do? Okay, not who you are, expressing who you are, but apologizing for expressing what I did. Somebody have an example of a situation? Okay, we'll use the stepped on our toe. Okay, I stepped on your toe. It's active. I did this, right? That's me expressing what I did. Take responsibility using I statements. So if we start out with your toe was stepped on, we're going to go back and say, I stepped on your toe. It is so important when we're apologizing that we use I. Okay? The reason why is because that helps the person to know I am attributing this action to myself. It's not passive tense. The toe was stepped on by me. Don't do that. Go back, switch it back, put it in active form. So it's I stepped on your toe. Express that it was wrong. Regret. I regret stepping on your toe. I wish I hadn't done that thing. Showing repentance, turning away from the behavior. I don't want to step on your toe. I will try not to do that in the future. Okay? That is sort of the word repentance has so many like spiritual connotations, but really what it means, and the reason why I use it, because it means a turning from, right? So a turning away from. So if you think about going the opposite direction, that's a really important part of repentance. Or, gosh, I'm struggling to think of a better word from change. Yeah, I'm expressing the intent to change, right? And then number 5, offering repair or restitution. How can I make that right? Can I get you an ice pack? Like, I'm willing to put myself out because I did something. Can I do something for you to make that any better? I can't unstep on your toe, but I can do something that's going to help you heal. Physically or emotionally, right? Me saying I did it is a really great help emotionally, right? Because if you're like, I didn't step on your toe. I didn't do that. Your toe is stepped on, which is so stupid, right? So pulling that back and saying, I stepped on your toe. I regret stepping on your toe. I don't want to step on your toe again. Can I get you something? Your toe is bleeding. Can I get you a Band-Aid? Can I help you clean that up? Can I do something, right? So that's that idea of repair or restitution. How can I make that right? Can I put energy in to help show that that was not my intention? And then requesting but not demanding forgiveness, right? I'm so sorry. Would you forgive me, right? And then leaving it. We don't stand there until they say, I forgive you, right? Okay, so as they have that apology, and now they're stepping into that space where they have their toe stepped on, and now they get to process through this forgiveness process, right? To say, what was done? My toe was stepped on. She stepped on my toe, right? I'm placing the blame appropriately. And then I'm going to go through and grieve. I feel hurt and sad, and my toe is aching, right? This is a good example. Thanks, Kelsey. And then forgiving and releasing. I forgive you for stepping on my toe, right? Consider reconciling. Is it safe? If the person has apologized, it is safe, right? It might be safe.
Unless they keep coming by and stepping on your toe.
If they keep coming back and stepping on your toe, you're right. Don't believe them. I'm sorry for this is what my kids do. I'm sorry for stepping on your toe. I'm sorry for stepping on your toe. I'm sorry for stepping on your toe. They're not actually sorry.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying don't do that.
Well, and that's what, if you're the one who's apologizing, this is when we show that we are trustworthy, right? We use our energy towards restitution and towards that turning away, that change intention, right? And we make ourselves safe so that they can trust us again. Because that enables those last 2 steps on our process. Consider reconciling and learning to trust again. If that person has actually changed, they're easier to trust, right? And then I can start to build that trust with them again. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So we just slowed it all down using a toe analogy. It works. And if we apply that to bigger things, it still works. Okay? I statements, regret, turning away, how can I make it right? And then requesting forgiveness and letting that sit while we do our work of earning their trust back.
So good.
This is great.
Sound good?
Yeah, so good.
a lot of work goes into to making your airplane. Okay, a lot of folding, a lot of twisting, a lot of turning the pages over, reading the instructions, and actually kind of putting that into practice. And then if you guys, like just to kind of make the analogy more complete, on the paper airplane, I'd love for you to name something, something that you want to release. Go ahead and write that on your airplane, just for the visual of that being a release. So let's say I put stubbing my toe or having my toe stepped on that. Then when I release that, that enacts the experience of forgiveness. By way of wrap up, let's talk through the example of the paper airplane. To remind you, we are tracing the path at the right side of that flow chart from Dr. David Stoop's book, Forgiving What You'll Never Forget. So as you can see on that flow chart, we're looking at those steps here. That is forgiving what we'll never forget. This is once we place the blame appropriately, then we're able to grieve. Then we're able to forgive or release the hurt that was done to us. And next we consider reconciling. And finally, we learn to trust again. So using the example of the paper airplane, we're going to place the blame appropriately. And as we grieve, that's represented by us actually folding the paper airplane itself. So I just went onto a website, found all of these on funpaperairplanes.com. You can find them anywhere, or if you know how to fold an airplane on your own, by all means, go ahead and take a stab at it yourself. But if you think about this process of following the instructions and sort of going through this process of folding the airplane itself, what that does is that process of grieving as we continue to process, tell that story, process it with other people, and start to go through those events. That helps us to grieve. So eventually we end up with something that's something of a finished product like this. As we bring our hand up to actually fly that paper airplane, there's a point at which we actually let go of the paper. There's nothing else I can do once I've let go. I just get to see the effectiveness of that grief process. I release the airplane and watch as it lands. So that is this process. Right? These are great airplanes. They do actually fly really far, which is kind of fun. But if you think about this forgiveness part is the part of actually releasing. All right, so those next steps of considering reconciliation and learning to trust again are actually separate from the actual act of forgiving, and they require safety. We talked a little bit about that in the workshop, but we could expand much more on those processes as well. As you consider where you are in this process and what forgiveness might look like in your journey, I invite you to be curious about yourself and to attune to what you might need. As always, take care of yourself and reach out to Katie, me, or any of us working with FFCS if you need any support in this process. We can get you connected to various groups for practical support. Best wishes as you work on this. Thanks so much. Bye.